What's up, wild ones? It's Justin coming at you from the tiny house deep in the heart of Calgary, Alberta, Canada. And today we got something totally different for you. A while back I got an Amazon gift card for Christmas and I spent it all on leatherworking tools. And I tried to make a wallet and I failed miserably and I kind of gave up. But this channel has rekindled my interest in learning everything I possibly can. So I dusted them off, went to Tandy, got some leather, and I'm going to show you how we made a really cool tool pouch for some hairstyling tools on this episode of Wild Rose DIY.
So the first thing I'm going to do is just take a damp sponge to my leather. This is going to allow me to use my awl tool to just scratch in my patterns instead of using a marker. I've done some cosplay in my day, so I know the basics of making my own patterns. For this, I designed it around the tools I knew the pouch had to hold. So instead of using a marker and potentially ruining the leather, I'm just using the point of my awl. This way I can just have a really light scratch and then I can go ahead and cut it out using a utility knife. I always use my knife sharpener before I make any cuts because the sharper your knife is, the easier time you're going to have and the cleaner cut you're going to get. Also, using a ruler when you can is just going to help it be that much cleaner. Make sure all your cuts connect and make it into these tiny little corners, because otherwise you're going to have a bad time. I wanted the belt loop portion to have rounded edges, so I made sure to take my time and turn my piece as needed. I wanted my pouch to be nice and sturdy, so I used 2 layers for the back part. This also hid the stitching and rivets for the pockets I was planning to put on. Having the 2 layers also allowed me to have the smooth sides facing out and the rough sides hidden away. Next, I just cut out a simple square that I'm going to use to hold the scissors and comb in place. Then another strip that I was going to use to put all the hair clips on. I set up my hole punch for the rivets that I was going to use on the strap for the clips. I needed to get all the holes punched before I dyed the project black. When using the hole punch, I learned that it's a good idea to use a cutting board underneath instead of the cutting mat, because I can actually put a hole right through that. Next, I'm going to use my creasing tool to just mark out a line where all my stitches are going to go. This just keeps a nice and consistent line all the way around your project to make sure that your stitching is nice and straight. I definitely need a little more practice with this tool. Then I took my pricker and started punching out all the holes. This is where that line we marked out comes in handy, so you can just go ahead and put the little points right into that line and then punch all your holes. So parts of my project need to fold, so what I'm going to do is just mark out all the lines and take an edging tool and just carve out a little bit of the leather just so it folds a little flatter. Now I'm just going to use my awl to poke a little hole through one of the stitch holes I already made so I can line up the stitching properly on the other side here. This tool is a groover and it just cuts out a small little line of leather so you can set your pricker in there. I just put my front piece on top of my back piece just so when I'm punching these holes, I know they're going to line up. I'm just going to use this smaller pricker to make it around the corners. Next, I'm going to try out a little bit of wet molding. So what you do is just submerge your piece of leather completely in water and just let it soak in for a little bit. Then take it over to the pieces you want to mold around. In this case, we're going to use a couple pairs of shears and a comb. So what I'm going to do is just kind of lay them out where I want, and then I'm going to take my wet leather and then just work the leather in around all the pieces. That way it'll give you a nice molded look, and each tool will fit in the pocket perfectly. Then I'm just going to mark out loosely where I'm going to want my stitch lines to go. Then I can lay the pocket out on the pouch and mark out all the holes for my stitches. Make sure you take your time and do this as straight as possible and don't do what I did. I definitely could have got this straighter if I would have just slowed down and taken my time. I want to make sure that this pocket doesn't go anywhere, so I'm just going to punch out all the corners so I can rivet it to the back part of the pouch. The top part of the pouch is where my belt is going to pass through, so I'm just going to use my awl to mark out where to cut the holes. Once again, I'm just going to use my groover to mark out a stitch line all the way around the belt loops. I just want to make sure those are nice and reinforced and don't come apart. Now that all my pieces are cut out and all the holes are punched, I'm just going to use a little bit of this water-based black dye. So I just used a foam brush and brushed it on straight, but I found out later that it's best if you use a circular motion and maybe a dauber. I definitely had to put multiple coats on because every time it dried it seemed pretty streaky, so I'm still trying to get the hang of this, but the end product looked pretty good. I could leave this back section bare because I'm going to glue my other piece onto that one. Definitely make sure you get all the edges too. Once I had all my coats on and I was happy with the color, I used a little bit of this satin sheen finish. I just applied it using a sponge and rubbed it on and let it dry. Now I could finally start putting all my pieces together. So the first thing I was going to do is rivet the pocket to the front face of the pouch. Then it was time to start stitching. This took forever and was very tedious and very difficult. There are a lot of great tutorials online about how to do a saddle stitch. I'm probably not the person to ask since this is my first time doing it. But I'm just showing you that you can do it. You can go ahead, you can figure it out, and you can do it too. It's not the prettiest stitching I've ever seen, but it was made with love, and that's all you can ask for. So now that I had this all stitched and riveted together, I could take a little bit of contact cement, put it on both sides of my pouch, then just let it dry. When this stuff is dry to the touch, it may seem like you missed your chance, but this is the perfect time. This is exactly what you want. Once you stick these two pieces together, it's so hard to pull them apart. Trust me, I know. Just rub that in and make sure you're getting really good contact everywhere. I definitely didn't want my edges coming apart, so I just took some of these binder clips and clipped those on. I used some scrap leather to make sure that the clips didn't leave any marks. Then I used this jerry can to hold it all together. Then I used my awl tool just to go ahead and make these holes a little bit bigger. This will make things so much easier in the long run because then you'll be able to get both of your needles through no problem. So when you've come to the end of your stitch, you want to back stitch a couple holes. And then once you got that done, just cut it off and burn the ends with a lighter. Then don't forget to do the belt loops too. So now comes the tricky part, actually putting the pouch together. So I just use a little bit of contact cement on all the ends just to help it stay together so I could stitch it easier. Little binder clips definitely were a lifesaver on this one. So when you're doing any kind of leather work, you want to use a waxed thread, or you can use normal thread, but wax it with a little bit of beeswax. This just helps going through your project so much easier. I was definitely starting to get the hang of the stitch a little bit more at this point. For the front of my pouch, I just took a little bit of sandpaper and roughed the leather up. This will just make it easier for the contact cement to stick to. If anybody has a better idea of how to stitch this thing together than what I did here, I'm definitely all ears. This side was not so bad. It's the next side when the pouch is all enclosed that it became really difficult to sew. If you're new to leatherworking like I am, maybe try something a little bit easier. I was definitely running before I could walk on this project, but I definitely learned a lot, and I think I'll do a lot better the next time. So my front and back pieces didn't quite line up together properly, so I just cut off all the excess. Then I took my edger and just put a 45-degree bevel all the way around my piece. Then I just took a little bit of beeswax and rubbed it all the way around the seam so I could burnish it together. This gives it a much more polished look, and is definitely an art in and of itself. Then since I cut a little bit of excess off, I just made sure to take my die and just touched up all the edges. Then the last thing I needed to do was just put on a strap. So I wasn't going to sew this, I was just going to use some rivets. So I just punched out the holes and lined everything up and riveted it together. This little strap is just going to be used to hold some hair clips on. And after that, I think this little baby is done.
So that's it for this one, guys. Thanks a lot for tuning in. I think it turned out pretty cool. I definitely need to work on my stitching skill, which I've come to learn is definitely an art, and everybody else on YouTube makes it look way easier than it is. So I'm going to keep practicing that. I'm going to keep working on my leather work. I'm going to keep building all kinds of cool stuff, and I hope to see you on the next video. So make sure you pile drive that like button, slam that subscribe button, leave me a comment, let me know what you want to see. And I'll see you next time on Wild Rose DIY.